This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you. So we're going to move reasonably quickly through what we're going to cover this evening. So maybe first up we'll do a brief reading, and I might just do that just in the interests of time, and then we will. No, go back. It's my iPad doing the wrong thing. And then, in the interest of time, and then we might progress onto our comments. So we're looking at Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and we'll read through to verse 13. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God divided the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And he said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, and the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and the herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good, and the evening and the morning were the third day. And so, brothers and sisters, with that introduction, we might just recap quickly what we've been considering over the last couple of weeks. So as you'll recall, if you've been following us along, we've been talking about this concept of the abyss, the concept of that which is without form and that which is void, that which is covered in darkness. And we saw that this term without form had the idea of confusion, and this idea of void meant a vacuum or that which is desolate. And we looked at this idea of darkness briefly. And so, brothers and sisters, we've aligned this into the context of how do these things apply to us as individuals, because God's undertaking a creation effort or a creation work with us. And so how do these principles that we see in these early chapters of Genesis apply to us from a parabolic perspective? Because there's obviously the natural order of things being established in the way that God set in place our creation, but there's another story that underlines this, which is the creative work that God has undertaken with us. And so if you recall, we looked at the need for the right spirit. We looked at the idea of ruach last week, the spirit that motivates, and we had the comparison between the two types of spirit: the spirit that comes from the prince of the power of the air, the darkness, and we saw how the spirit of God was the spirit of wisdom and the spirit of might and the spirit of counsel, and how God breathed on Christ and how Christ breathed in that spirit and became one with God. They breathed together, and we saw that all scripture is given by the breathing of God, and that we too, as the children of God, need to breathe that spirit. And so if we are to escape that which is confusing, and if we are to escape that which is dark, and if we are to escape that which is desolation, then we need to have the right tools to do so, because there's a need for us sometimes to go and face the darkness. There is a need for us to go and confront the desert. We think about the children of Israel. They had to go into the desert for 40 years, didn't they? And they were literally in the dark. You know, obviously the sun was shining and they had the pillar, but they were wandering around for 40 years, aimlessly, as though they were in the dark. The place was a desolation. They were confused. Christ had to go out into the wilderness for 40 days and for 40 nights and confront the desolation and confront the confusion. And we too in our own lives, from time to time, have to go and confront that which is unknown. We have to go and confront that which is dark and that which is confusing and that which is desolation. And in any endeavor, in anything that we go about in our lives that is new, we're going to have to face those concepts, because often we are, when we're trying to do new things, we fumble in the dark a little bit, and and things are confusing because we don't have all the information available to us, and there are things lacking. It feels a bit like a desert. We walk out and try and do new things, create new ventures, and grow as people. That process requires that we have to go and explore unknown territory, and the very fact that that is unknown territory, which is the precursor for the creative work, requires us to have very specific tools. And so we looked at the idea of words of power, we looked at the idea of the Spirit of God, and we are going to look today at this idea of the light. We're going to look at this idea of separation, and we're going to look at this idea of productivity. And so, as I said, we've got quite a bit to run through this evening, so I apologise if I move quickly. We are recording the session, so you can go back and download the recording and review the recording. So if there's a bit you missed, you can go back and re-listen to that. Obviously, happy to take questions at the end, or if you want to send me an email. So what is the first thing that gets created? And we read in verse 4, the first thing that's created is light. Verse 3, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And so God calls forth with his word the creation of light. And there can't be anything created without light. It's the first thing that is created. So we have the Spirit which is present, we have the words of power which call forth the future into reality now, and the first thing that is called forth into reality is the light. So what is the light? What does light do? Well, light is that which reveals. Light is that which clarifies and provides visibility. And it's interesting in verse 4 that it's only the light that is considered good. The darkness is not considered good. Now, the darkness is necessary, but it's not considered good. And light dispels darkness, doesn't it? So come with me to John chapter 1 and verse 5. Maybe just quickly, we'll just look at this idea of light. The words ore means to illuminate. Probably no surprises there. It's used 123 times in Scripture, mostly translated as light and lights. And one of those key verses we're going to look at is in Psalm 119. So firstly, let's go across to John chapter 1 in verse 5. Because John's gospel is very different to the other gospels. John's gospel isn't a historical gospel like Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It's a gospel designed around a specific idea, which is helping mankind to become the sons of God, helping mankind to adopt the word into their lives. And so he starts, unlike the other gospels, with the creative process that God's undertaking. This is the spiritual creation. So we looked at this a little bit last week, this idea of the word. And in verse 5, we have this idea of the light. And it says there that the light shines in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. So what does that mean? Well, it means that the light dispels the darkness, and the darkness cannot comprehend it. And so it's like a candle in a dark room. When you're in a pitch black room, you can't see anything, and as soon as there's any flicker of light, your eyes are naturally gravitate towards that light. And it's interesting in these verses 1 sort of through to verse 5, we've got these three ideas that come up in Genesis chapter 1. We've got the idea of the word, the logos, the words of power. We've got the idea of life. Verse 4, in him was life. So we've got the idea of the Spirit, that which motivates and that which animates. And we also have this idea of light here, this requirement that's necessary for creation. Without light, you can't have creation. And not surprisingly, John speaks quite a lot about light. Come across to John chapter 3, verse 19, we read that this is the condemnation. So this is the condemnation of the world, that light has come unto the world, but men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. And so darkness is that which conceals, and light is that which reveals. And so Paul says in Ephesians 5 verse 11, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness. So stay away from the light. You know, nothing good grows in darkness. Even in the natural world, you know, it's funguses and other nasty poisonous stuff that gravitate to the darkness. That which is wholesome and nutritious and nourishing needs light. And the thing with light is that light is obvious and undeniable. It dispels darkness. And so it reveals. And so we come to this quote in Psalm 119, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. And there's two ideas there. The lamp is that which illuminates immediately in front of you, so you can see immediately where your feet are. And the light is the light which goes forth out down the path, and so you can see where you're going. And recall from our discussions a couple of weeks ago that the darkness and the voidness and the without form were a description of the people, and that the people saw a great light. Those who were sitting in darkness saw a great light, Matthew 4, verse 16. And it's been interesting, you know, lately with the coronavirus, they've been doing a lot of studies on light. And light is UV, ultraviolet light, but light is a purifier, and it kills the coronavirus, interestingly. And they use it in operating theatres to sanitize the operating theatre. So light is a very powerful disinfectant. It kills that which is unclean. It destroys that which is dangerous. And light brings life. It's a precursor to life. And we see that in Genesis chapter 1, where light starts, and then you have the rest of the creation rolls on from the creation of light. Come across to John chapter 8, verse 12. John 8, verse 12, then Jesus spoke again, saying to them, I am the light of the world. He that follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. And so the light provides us with the thing that allows us to distinguish life. Without life, you can't distinguish. Sorry, without light, it's not possible to distinguish life. And so the light gave us the ability to comprehend the life. Young's literal translation says, the light of the life. And so it's talking about Christ. And so Christ is saying, listen, you need the light to be able to comprehend me. Because as Paul says, he's a life-giving spirit. He's a quickening spirit. The first Adam was a living spirit, but this spirit, Christ, is a life-giving spirit, and we need the light to be able to comprehend, understand Christ. We need the light. We find in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 this idea of God's light in the creation correlated to the spiritual light. 2 Corinthians 4, verse 6, he says, for God who commanded the light to shine out of darkness, that's Genesis chapter 1, verse 3, he commanded the light to shine out of the darkness, hath shined in your hearts. Well, it's obviously not literal. God didn't open up your chest cavity and get a candle and just have a look around your heart. He's taking a literal metaphor and he's applying a spiritual metaphor to it, to give you the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ, because you can't see the face of Jesus Christ without the light. You need that light. And so the light is the thing which produces the framework and the clarity for creation. And this is an interesting thing. It's an important concept to understand, brothers and sisters, because when God creates Adam and Eve, he creates them with a very, very special capability, which is not shared with any of the animals. And the capability that he gives to man is that man can carry the light. He can be a vessel of light. So you can carry the light of the gospel in you, because you're made in the image and likeness of God. You have the capacity to be a light bearer. And I'll give you a great example of that. Acts chapter 2. In the upper room, what happens? 12 disciples are there. And what happens? The Spirit comes upon them. And what does the Spirit look like? It looks like a flame. So what are they? They're light bearers. They're candles. They literally are human candles. And what does Christ say? Don't hide your candle under the bushel. You're a light bearer. Let your light shine. And so light gives us clarity. The light allows us to perceive the life of Christ. The light allows us to see the face of Christ. And clarity, brothers and sisters, is about what to do. It's not about why did this happen to me. We sort of discussed this briefly, I think, a couple of classes ago about Job. God didn't explain to Job the why of the situation. He doesn't explain to Job, the nefarious situation with Gavin, who's the vagabond who wanders around the place and only turns up to the meeting every so often. He doesn't discuss that conversation that God has with this person, the devil. He says to Job, sometimes you get to be the lion that eats the deer, and sometimes you're the deer that gets eaten by the lion. Question isn't why. The question is, what can I do? What is my next set of steps? And this was why the unfaithful steward was commended, because he sat down and said, well, what can I do and what can't I do? Well, I can't dig ditches and I refuse to beg. So what can I do? Well, I'll go and write down the receipts so that I can preserve my life. And so we're called, brothers and sisters, aren't we, that we should turn from darkness. Come across to Acts chapter 26. We're called to turn aside from spiritual darkness. Acts chapter 26, verse 18, we read these words. Delivering thee from the people and from the Gentiles unto whom now I send thee, to open their eyes and to turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan unto God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among them which are sanctified by faith that is in me. And so what does the light give you? Well, the light gives you access to forgiveness of sins. It gives you freedom from darkness. It gives you freedom from Satan. There's some interesting words there. It says there that their eyes were shut. They did not have the ability to open their eyes. And so they were given the ability to open their eyes and see. The word turn there means to revert, to turn back. It's the idea of repentance, to turn around from walking in the darkness. I might actually have turn around and walk out of the darkness. That's probably not a bad one. This idea of clarity. To be freed from the power of Satan. The idea of power there means a legal right. He has a legal right to demand your service. You're freed from that. You're freed from the privilege that the Satan, human nature, has over you. The one that causes death, has the power of death. It's the same as sin. And you have access to the forgiveness of sins, the right or privilege to be accepted by God, the mechanism by which we are no longer separated from God. We read about that in Isaiah 59, verse 2. We're told that God is faithful to forgive our sins, 1 John 1, verse 19. And so we have now been given a birthright of inheritance and heritage, and it starts with light. Light has to come first. And so light gives us clarity. We can see clearly when we have the light. So come then to back to Genesis chapter 1. And let's look at verse 5, because there's an interesting conundrum that comes up here. Genesis chapter 1, verse 5. God called the light day, and he called the darkness night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. That's strange. Because why does God allow for night? Because what we're being told here is that nighttime is the absence of light, and daytime is the presence of light. Now, I'm not sure what the power bills are like in heaven. I presume that there's no charge for the production of light in heaven. So I'm not really sure why God needs to turn the lights off. Why does he allow a night to occur? What's the principle there? Why does he want to have a night? Well, it's interesting, brothers and sisters, because our experience of life is an experience of night and day. And I don't mean that just in a natural sense that, our alarm goes off at 7 o'clock in the morning and, hey, wow, the sun's up, and, the cows are mooing and the birds are tweeting and the insects are buzzing. And then, around 6 o'clock, the sun goes down and the moon comes up. It's not the point. Our experience in our lives is an oscillation between light and darkness, because we have a war that we're fighting in ourselves. And so there are times when the light burns brightly in us, times when the light wanes, and we sometimes feel that we're in the darkness. Well, clearly, the absence of light is the darkness. And our way back out of the darkness, as we've said before, is the right spirit, words of power, and the light. And so we've got to come back to light. This is the first day of the Lord. It's interesting, isn't it? This is the first day in our creation of the Lord. There is another day of the Lord, which starts in almost exactly the same way. Isaiah 60, verse 1 to 3, we read these words: Arise, shine, for thy light has come, and the glory of Yahweh is risen upon thee. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth. That's Genesis chapter 1. And gross darkness the people. But Yahweh shall arise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee. The Gentiles shall come to thy light, and kings to the brightness of thy rising. That's the day of the Lord. It's the new day. It's the new creation. It's the introduction of the re-establishment of God's kingdom on earth. It's the re-establishment of Eden on earth. And it starts in darkness, just as the first creation, the first day, started in darkness. And so God's going to undertake a new creation. This is going to be the day of the Lord. And so Christ says to his disciples, he says to them that, you should rejoice while you have the light. John chapter 12. We have those words. And what's the point he's making? Well, he's saying, well, while I'm with you, you have the light, and therefore you should rejoice. But there's going to come a time when you won't have the light. John 12, verse 35 to 36. Jesus said to them, yet a little while is the light with you. Walk while you have the light, lest darkness come upon you. For he that walks in darkness doesn't know where he's going. While you have the light, believe in the light, that ye may be the children of light. These things Jesus said and departed and hid himself from them. So what's he saying? He's saying, listen, here's your opportunity. I'm with you and you have the light, and I can give that light to you. Take the opportunity. Because there's going to come a time when I won't be here and you won't have me as the light. You will have to be able to sustain the light yourself. And there's a really beautiful concept that is picked up in Revelation chapter 21. Because in Revelation chapter 21, there are no more days. There is no more darkness for the city of God. Revelation chapter 21, verse 22. I saw no temple therein, for Yahweh, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine upon it, for the glory of God lightened it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. So there's no night. Night has disappeared. There's no longer a need for night. And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honour to it. And the gates of the city shall never be shut at all by day, because there is no night there. Something fundamental has shifted. Something fundamental has changed. There's no oscillation between night and day anymore. Well, why not? Because the citizens of that city don't oscillate from light to darkness to light to darkness. They are light all of the time. They don't wax and wane like the mortal population. And we're also told there, aren't we? It's interesting in verse 27, it says, there shall be In no wise enter there anything that defiles, neither works abomination or makes a lie, but that which are written in the book of the Lamb. That's interesting, because what are those concepts about? Well, those concepts are about liars. So what does a liar do? A liar calls into reality confusion and darkness. It's the opposite of words of power. It's opposite of logos. No liars are allowed. Only people who speak words of truth and power, whose words are always productive, are permitted in that city. And nothing that is unclean. We're going to look at this very shortly. What are we told to do with the unclean? We're told to separate ourselves from it. We're told to cut it off. We're told to sacrifice it. And what did he say? No one and nothing that creates an abomination and nothing that creates uncleanness will be permitted in that city. And so you've got the literal fulfillment of the principles of Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through to 13, in Revelation chapter 21, in that city. And what is that city? That city is the garden of God. That city is New Jerusalem. That city is Eden re-established. And so these concepts and principles, which are foundational in Genesis, are mapped across into Revelation. And so we're called, brothers and sisters, that we should walk in the light, and that there should be no darkness in us, that we should manifest ourselves just as our Heavenly Father manifests himself. We are vessels of light. We are vessels of God's Spirit. We are candles that shouldn't be hidden. And so come then across to Genesis chapter 1. I appreciate that I'm moving quite quickly through these ideas, so I hope you can keep up. We want to look at this idea of division, this idea of separation. And so we read here in verse 6 to 8, day 2, God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, let it divide the waters from their waters. And God made the firmament, and he divided the waters from under the firmament and the waters which are above, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day." Question: what is the basis for division? If you're reading carefully, a bit earlier in the chapter, you'll know the answer. What is the basis of division? What is the thing which causes the division? Can you see it? Verse 4. God saw the light and it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. It's the light that creates the necessity for division. It's light that creates the necessity for separation. This word divide here, that means to separate. It's actually two words, Bordal and Bain, or Barney, I'm not sure how to say it, I'm not a Hebrew scholar. But it means to separate, to make a distinction with a space in between. That's an interesting thing, isn't it? To make a distinction. Well, how do you create a distinction? Well, you create a distinction by creating a contrast. So what creates contrast? Light creates contrast. It's like Art School 101. Right? Light is what creates contrast. Otherwise, you have no contrast, you just have pitch black. There's no contrast, it's just black. It's just darkness. And it's used, this word is used in Exodus 26 verse 3 regarding the curtain that divided the holy from the most holy. So what are we being told? We're being told this: there is a necessity to divide that which is holy from that which is common. This word Baini is the word that's used of the seat of the cherubim. It's used in Exodus chapter 25, and it talks about the space between the cherubim. So cherubim either side, and then the space in between is the same word. It's the space where the blood would be sprinkled. And it's also the word that's used in Leviticus 27 verse 12 of the priest when he valued something. If he assessed something He had to assess it, whether it was clean or unclean. He had to make a division. He had to make a separation between those things. And so what causes separation? It's light that creates separation. It's the same word divide in verse 4 as in verse 6. Those same two words are used. So, what happens if you don't have separation? We looked at this a little bit, didn't we? Genesis chapter 6 is what happens if you don't have separation. If you don't have a distinction between the holy and the unholy. What is Genesis 6 about? Genesis 6 is about a return to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. That's what Genesis 6 is. Genesis 6 is a return to without form and void and darkness covering the earth. That's what Genesis 6 is. Except for one notable distinction, that there was a man whose name was Noah, who was just, perfect in his generations, and walked with God. It's the only reason why we weren't back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. And why did that happen? Because we're told that the sons of God, the holy, saw the daughters of men, the unholy, and took them for wives, whoever they chose. And the place went, well, quite literally, to confusion and to desolation and to gross darkness. And God said, fine, that's what you want, that's what you can have. I'm going to call for the storm, and I'm going to break up the foundations of the earth, and I'm going to flood the world. Genesis chapter 11 is an extension of Genesis chapter 6. Because what happens in Genesis chapter 11? Everybody's joined together with one tongue, one language, one family, and one nation. And what are they doing? They're defying God. And what is God's concerned? They're going to wipe out my family if I don't deal with them. So what does he do? Fine. If the children of God refuse to separate themselves from the unclean, I will make them do it. And he confuses the tongues. And what happens? Tongues and languages and peoples and nations and families. And just after that section about Babel, you have the genealogy of life. So it worked. That's what that story is about. He's forcing division. And it's a necessary thing, but it's an evil principle. Because the second day is not called good. The other days are all called good. And the whole lot's called very good, which tells you that day 2 is a really important principle. Why is it a really important principle? Because if you don't have the separation between that which is holy and that which is unholy, you lose the family of God. And God is intimately concerned about the family of God, because it's his family. Come across to 2 Corinthians chapter 6. We looked at this a few weeks ago. We just want to touch on it again. So I want to introduce another concept which is intimately tied together with this idea of separation. Because practically, what does separation mean? Like in practical terms, what does it mean for us? And so we know this section, 2 Corinthians chapter 6. Get my slides working. Separation of night and day, the clouds, that which is heavenly and that which is earthly. We're going to come to that in a minute. The oceans are on the earth, and the heaven and the clouds are in the heavens. 2 categories of people. Look at that in a minute. Then a flood that overwhelmed the world, obliterated everything except for that family, that faithful, just man who walked with God. And so we come then, don't we, to this idea of separation. Separating that which is holy from that which is unholy. And I'll let you make your own decision about which are the holy jelly beans and which are the unholy jelly beans. I note that most of the black jelly beans are left behind. But we know this section, don't we, in 2 Corinthians 6, because it's a conversation about separation. He says in verse 14, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. In other words, you shouldn't be associated with unbelievers because you're not an unbeliever. For what fellowship does righteousness have with unrighteousness, and what communion should light have with darkness? They're mutually exclusive. Light is mutually exclusive of darkness. What concord does Christ have with Belial? Or what part does a believer have with an infidel? What agreement does the temple of God have with the temple of idols? Because you are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. You are the cherubim. You are the light bearers. The light dwells in you like the candles. We saw in Acts chapter 2. Wherefore come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and don't touch the unclean thing. And on that basis, I will receive you. So this is interesting, right? Because what's God saying? God's saying, listen, I'm over here. and you're over there with them, and you need to come out. You need to leave them. And Abraham was the first one who's told, come out from your people. Hebrew means to cross over, the one who left his family and everything. And so God's over here, and God's saying, come and join me. Separate yourself and come and join me. What does that require of us? That requires us to make sacrifices, because the temple of idols is appealing. Hanging out with the local numbskulls is appealing to the flesh. Being engaged in business transactions and in business with infidels is appealing to the flesh. Get along to get along. It's the Canaanite doctrine. It's the leaven of the Herodians. And God says you need to cut that off. You can't associate with that. You need to cut that off and step away. Touch not the unclean thing. And if you do that, if you come to me, then I will be your father, and you will be my children. It's a critically important and necessary thing. We need to separate ourselves from the things that drag us into the abyss. We need to free ourselves from the things that drag us back into the darkness, that drag us back into that which is desolate and that which is confusion. And we fight that battle every day, because we are like the day. We oscillate between light and darkness. And our objective is to always be light. And so separation means sacrifice. It means giving up the idols. It means giving up the broad way for the narrow way. It means giving up the wide gate for the straight gate. It means giving up your natural family for the family of Christ. It means cutting off the flesh. And so these principles come up, don't they? We'll just jump back to this one. This one here. There's a separation. And Paul picks this up, doesn't he, in the 1st of Corinthians, verse 15. That which is earthly versus that which is heavenly. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 44. Verse 42 for some context. So also the resurrection of the dead, it is sown in corruption, it is raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor, it is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness, it is raised in power. It is sown a natural body. It's sown as part of the ocean. It's part of the nations of the world. But it is raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body and a spiritual body. The first, as it is written, the first Adam was made a living soul, and the last Adam was a quickening spirit. Verse 48, as the earth, such are they that are earthly, that which belongs to the earth. That which belongs to the earth is the oceans, because they're on the earth. And there is such that is heavenly. And see those clouds? What are we told? There is a great cloud of witnesses who are waiting for you. Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. And so what are we? We are called up, aren't we? We are called out of the oceans into the heavenly to form those clouds, to become part of that great cloud of witnesses. And what causes that? It is caused by, well, naturally, it's caused by convection, which is the heat of the sun. What's the sun? A great big light. So the thing that causes us to leave that which is earthly, that which is the oceans, and be elevated into the heavenly is the sun, the light. And that light is our Lord Jesus Christ. And so separation is such a critical thing. If you want to escape the abyss, then you need to practice separation. You need to practice sacrifice. And Christ says, look, if you're not prepared to take up your cross and follow me, then you're not worthy of me. You're not worthy of me. If you're not prepared to make the sacrifice, if you're not prepared to separate yourself, if you're not prepared to leave your family and your kindred and come to a place which I will show you to receive the promises, no, you're not worthy. So this is why this principle is such a critical principle, such a critical concept to understand, the need for separation. Because if we don't have separation in our lives, we're destined for the void. We're destined for the darkness. We're destined for that which was confusing and without form. That's what Genesis 6 is all about. It's a return to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. And so let's look at this next day 3. Verses 9 to 13. God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and he gathered together of the waters, and he called them seas, and God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. So, this is actually a really good point. So this is the thing to understand. We need to separate ourselves from that which is going to pull us back into the void. The point is this: the thinking that got us to where we are today is not going to get us, is not the thinking that is going to get us to where we want to be in the future. And so we need to adopt a different frame of mind. We need to adopt the mind of Christ. We need to accept the need for sacrifice, and we need to accept the need for the light in our lives, and forsake the old way of thinking and adopt the new way of thinking. So the word here, coming to day 3, verse 9 to 13, the word yielding here is the word zorah, and it means to sow. The root means to expand, and the concept behind it, the concept behind day 3 is productivity, that which produces. This word is used in Genesis chapter 26 and in verse 12 in the context of Isaac, who sowed and he yielded 100-fold. It's interesting because what does Christ say? He says, he throws out the seed, and there is a return on that planting. Some, I'm trying to get the numbers right now, some 20-fold, some 40-fold, some 100-fold. The only person recorded to have had a 100-fold result is Isaac. And who's Isaac? Well, Isaac is the seed of promise. He represents the Messiah. What does Christ say to his disciples when they're in Samaria? In John chapter 4, he says, there's a great harvest. Pray that the Lord sends more harvesters. The yield, the productivity of the speaking forth of the gospel is overwhelming. And so day 3 is all about productivity. And so there's a need for sacrifice. Right? We need to get rid of the things which pull us back into the void, that pull us back into the abyss, but we need then to start a process of production. So we need to be productive. We need to be creating value. Remember, so this idea of bountiful harvest, bountiful production. That's not it's not a wheat field. If you're wondering, that's actually a rice paddy. But I thought this was a pretty. Remember the parable of the monsters in the house? Read about this in Luke chapter 11, verse 24 to 25. Remember what happened? That the demon was evicted from the house, and then the person cleared out the house. The house was beautiful and empty. It was completely cleared out. And the demon wanders in the desert, in the desolate places, and he's looking for a home, and he thinks, this is hopeless. I'm going to go back and see what's going on back at the other place. He goes back and he looks in, and the place is beautiful and clean. There's nothing in there. It's a vacuum. It is empty. There's nothing going on in there. And he goes, wow, this is great. This is a perfect place. I will go and get 7 of my mates, and I'll come back. And what does Christ say? That situation was way worse than the situation that started. What was the problem? The person, he had the sacrifice bit right. He didn't have the create value bit right. He didn't have the production bit right. And so we need to go from separating ourselves from the world to being productive in the things of Christ. What does Jesus say, and what does Paul say in Titus? Jesus is looking for a people who are zealous, excited by good works. Not ho-hum about good works, not semi-interested in good works, not, well, I can't be bothered getting around to it, I'll do it, good works. No, excited by them. Like, if there's an opportunity, I'm there. That's what I want to do. And productive activity is the way you turn your life around. And I'll give you the scriptural example. Come across to Ephesians chapter 4. If you are struggling in your life with challenges in your life, then you aren't busy on the right things. Either you haven't made the necessary sacrifices and cut off the things which are dragging you back into the abyss, or you aren't busy on the right things. And let me show you. Ephesians chapter 4. Verse 23 for some context. Be renewed in the spirit of your mind. So this is Genesis chapter 1, right? The right spirit. You need the new spirit. You need the Spirit of God. That you put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. Okay, so why is it that we have to go into that which is without form and void and to confront the confusion and to confront the darkness? Because we're on a path of transformation. We need to be confronted with the desert, because there's things we need to cut off ourselves in the desert and leave in the desert. So when we come out the other side of the desert, we're a new man. And by new, I don't mean jaded, upset, and angry. I mean more mature in the things of Christ. I know plenty of people who've been through trials and have come out the other side more bitter and angry than they went into them, which is sad, because what that means is that God's got to go and put them through it again because they didn't get it the first time. And invariably, that's what happens. And usually the second time it's uglier. So put on the new man, which is after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. Wherefore putting away lying, right? So what's the problem? Lying is the problem. How do you get rid of it? Well, you practice speaking the truth with your neighbour. So you don't sit there and go, I'm such a liar, 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 oh, I'm such a terrible person, I'm such a liar. It's no. You speak every man the truth. You replace the negative with the positive. You replace that which calls forward confusion and darkness with that which calls forward edification and light and clarity. Don't be, if you're angry, be angry, but don't sin. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath. In other words, two issues. Number one, look, you're going to get angry sometimes. Quite acceptable as long as you don't sin. Has to be for the right reason. Christ was angry with the money changers and he overturned their tables. He was angry with Peter because Peter was not aligned with God's will. But don't let the sun go down on your anger, right? So the objective here is not to be angry. The objective here is to be reconciled. So what do you replace anger with? You replace anger with actions which are designed to reconcile you. That's what you do. So you take the negative and you don't sit there and go, oh, I'm such an angry person. I can never say anything nice to anybody. I'm so aggravated. Everybody's a moron. You know, why can't people be smarter? You don't focus on that. You focus on, how do I reconcile myself? How do I remove the problem? Neither give place to diabolos. Let him that stole steal no more. Well, that's kind of obvious, but the point's this. Replace the activity of stealing with the activity of working with your hands, that which is good, so you can give to others. So replace stealing with giving. And by the way, you should be working at it. It's not that you rob somebody else to give to somebody else. It's not steal from Peter to pay Paul. It's no, you go out and you dig the ditch and you get paid and you take that money and you give that to that poor person who doesn't going to eat tonight. That's what you're to do. Let no corrupt communication come out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying and building up. In other words, be productive. You need to produce a yield. And this is super important. I'll show you why it's super important. Come to John 15. What is John 15 about? Well, John 15 is the litmus test as to whether you are in the vine or not. Here's a question. Are you in the vine? Are you holding the vine? John 15, verse 1, I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that bears not fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he purges it, and it might bring forth more fruit. Question, how do you know if you're in the vine or not? How do you know? Are you being productive? Are you creating value for Christ? Are you zealous for good works? Because if you are, then you abide in the vine. But don't kid yourself, because if you're not, you do not belong in the vine, and you will be cut out of it. Verse 4, abide in me, and I will abide in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine. No more can ye, except you abide in me. And so we need to abide in Christ to be able to produce value. We need to abide in Christ if we want to produce a yield. Day 3, really important. And you know what? Being productive, it's a dirty business. You have to be prepared to get dirty. You have to be prepared to deal with people which you may not want to have to deal with. You may have to go and do things which you feel are below you. Proverbs 14, verse 4. Where there are no oxen, the crib is clean. But there is much increase in the strength of the ox. What's the point? Well, do you want a clean house or do you want a productive house? Sometimes it's necessary to walk around behind an ox and stare at its backside as you go up and down the fields. And then you've got to get up in the morning and muck out at stables. Like, that's the deal. Get on with it. Be productive. Productive, you are not in the vine. And when I say productive, I don't mean productive in the sense that you're making money in your business or that you're busy educating your children. All those things are important. You should be, you need to earn an income and you need to do those things to survive and live, and God blesses us in those things. But productivity is productivity in the things of God. It's different. The lazy and unfaithful steward who hid the money in the ground, he wasn't lazy. He was very busy about his own business. He was not busy about Christ's business. He was not busy about his Lord's business. That's the point of that parable. He was lazy when it came to God. He was lazy when it came to serving his master. And so that's been a bit of a whirlwind coverage of those 3 key concepts: the light, the need for separation or sacrifice, and the need to be productive. If you want to come back from the abyss, if you are in a dark place where things are confusing and where everything seems to be broken and desolate, these are the principles you need. These are the concepts that you need to put in place. You need to have the right spirit. You need the Spirit of God. So open your Bible, and you won't want to because you're miserable. And you hate everybody, and you think everybody hates you. And they don't. Some people might hate you, but not everybody. I'm joking. You need the right spirit. You need words of power, which means you can't be deceiving yourself. You can't be lying to yourself, and you can't be lying to other people. So you need to be honest, and you need to use words of power to call forth your preferred future into reality. You need the light. You need clarity. You need to be able to see properly. And when you are in the dark and confused and struggling with desolation, it's hard. It's hard to see clearly because everything is so in your face. Everything is so overwhelming. And you need to make the right sacrifices, because the things that put you there, the thinking that got you into that mess, is not going to be the thinking that's going to get you out. It won't work. You need a new way of thinking. So things have to leave. You have to cut stuff off you. You have to take the blade of the Spirit of God and circumcise your heart. Not going to be pleasant, but it's critically important, because you've got to forsake the unclean thing. Something unclean has thrown you into that mess. Then once you've made those necessary sacrifices, you need to get busy. You need to get busy in the service of Christ. You need to be creating value. You know, the first thing that God does with Adam after he creates him and after he puts him in the Garden of Eden, right? So the second thing, God creates Adam, and Adam's created in the desert. He's created outside the garden. So only Adam knows what the garden is. He's the only one who knows what it's like to not be in the garden. Eve doesn't. Eve was created inside the garden. Adam was created outside it. So God picks Adam up and he puts him in the garden. And the very next thing he says to Adam is, "You've got work to do, son. You need to keep the garden." And that tells you some really important things about God. It tells you that God has an expectation that you will be busy. He gave him a job, so obviously he should be busy. And that job should produce value. That value should be created. God was expecting a yield from the work that Adam produced. So what does that tell you about God? God believes in the value, in the creation of value. So what are you going to bring when you come to the judgment seat? What offering are you going to present? Because there will be times in your life when you are going to have to face the abyss. Abraham had to face the abyss. God gives him a vision where he is confronted by a horror of darkness. We will all have to face the day of our own demise if Christ doesn't return. And so we must put on then the whole armour of Christ. We must fortify ourselves and be formed to the work. We must commit ourselves to words of power that we might pray. The fervent, effectual prayer of a righteous man, that's words of power. We need to have clarity. We need to live in the light. We need to make the right sacrifices, and we need to do the works of God. So I hope those three studies have been helpful and will serve you well as you continue to pursue your commitment to transformation, because this is what you're doing. You have committed yourself to Christ. You have committed yourself to taking on the mind of Christ. You've committed to becoming part of Christ, and that requires a creation process. And that creation process, the precursor to that creation process is confusion, desolation, and darkness. That's where it starts. But out of it comes the kingdom of God. And God is creating in you that kingdom. He's creating in you the Garden of Eden where he will dwell. So with that, any questions or comments?
I was thinking about what you were saying, Justin, about, when we get down in a really dark place, our light is tending to go out in that kind of circumstance. So we actually need to get together with other people who have the light to help us to see more clearly where we need to go.
Yeah.
And get all our little lights together to create a bigger light.
Yeah, yes. Christ, it's an interesting, and it's a quote from Isaiah where he says that the Messiah will not stamp out the smouldering flax. So the flax it's just smoking, and there's the tiniest little bit of light in a small amount of heat. And he doesn't come and stamp it out, he blows on it and whoosh, back into flame, back into light again. And you're right. We need to be, and we need, one of the works of the sons of God is to be mindful of their other brothers and sisters. Like their brothers and sisters that we know that are struggling, who need some support, and often support. Now, if you do any work with depression or investigate depression, it's horrible, but the horrible ailment. But the best thing to do is to sit and listen. You don't have to say anything. You're not there to fix them. You're just there to listen. Just listen. Now, how hard's that?
Yeah, we tend to be orientated to the idea of we've got to say something, we've got to fix something, we've got to do something.
And men are terrible for that. I mean, it's shocking. Men are shocking. Catherine tells me all the time, I'm not telling you this because I want you to fix it. There's nothing to fix. Just listen.
Listen.
Okay. But we could, don't want a solution, just listen.
In regards to separation, Justin, how, in practical terms, how far would you say we have to go?
Well, that is the big question.
Exactly, and that's the hard one.
I think the need for sacrifice. Well, I'll give you the answer that Christ gave to the rich young man. He came to Jesus and he said, Master, what must I do to be saved? And he said, you need to obey the commandments. And he said, well, I've obeyed the commandments since my youth. Then he goes, fine, good. Now, go and sell everything you have. Give it to the poor, and then come and follow me. Now, why does he say that? Because he wasn't in a place to follow Christ until he had done that. And so here's the question. If it doesn't cost you something, you're not sacrificing.
But
Yeah,
therefore, separation and sacrifice will be different from one individual to another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You still have to be respectful and everything to your family, though, don't you? I mean, even if they're unbelievers, it's a very, I mean, I haven't got anyone in the truth. They're all unbelievers. So it's very hard for me to hear this and think this is what I have to do. It's getting to be very like the brethren where they separate and cause trouble. If
You don't have to be rude. Like, you don't have to be rude. Like most of my family are not in the truth either. Most of my family are.
Well, have you followed them here? They're near you, though, aren't they?
Oh, they are now. I spent 25 years in Australia and they weren't near me.
It's just a very hard for when you don't have anyone in there and what you do. I'm having this trouble right now, so.
Yeah, so what you do is you stand by the principles of Christ, and you're polite and kind, and you you attend the things which are non-compromising. You turn up to weddings and you go around and you check on people and make sure they're well, and you inquire after their welfare, and you go around for dinner and those kind of things. That is natural familial obligations that you shouldn't be avoiding, but you